Prophecy or prophetic ministry, I don't know what you understand when you hear the word prophecy or you hear about prophetic ministry. Primarily, mainly, prophetic ministry or prophecy is not about predicting the future. Next Saturday, this will happen. Next month, this will happen. This year, this is going to happen. Prediction. And that's how we understand prophecy. But in the Bible, prophecy is not mainly about this. Yes, prophecy always, or in most cases, will have an element of the future. But that is not the thrust of the prophetic word. That is not the focus of the prophetic word. This kind of prediction or predictive prophecy is called foretelling. So you are foretelling, F-O-R-E. Foretelling something before it happens. But biblical prophecy is more than prediction. Biblical prophecy is mainly about being empowered by the Spirit of God and speaking truth. That is biblical prophecy. So, more than foretelling, it is mainly forthtelling. F-O-R-T-H. Forthtelling. Foretelling points to what is going to happen in the future. Forthtelling points to what is happening now. It declares how God sees things, how God sees the situation, and what our response should be in the face of that situation. Foretelling is about predicting the future. Forthtelling is about interrupting the present. Foretelling is predicting the future. Forthtelling, biblical prophecy, is about interrupting the present so that we will rearrange our lives for the future. So there is an element of the future, but it is not simply about predicting. It is this, like, this is happening right now, and therefore you must live like this, otherwise this will happen. But if you live your life like this now, because of the situation, if you do this, then I will bless you like this. There is an element of the future, but mostly it is about being empowered to speak truth in the present. And many times it upsets the status quo, it upsets the way things are. Usually, biblical prophetic ministry speaks from down to up. Meaning, usually it is from a person down here to people up there. That is the pattern of biblical prophecy. The other word for that is that biblical prophecy speaks truth to power. It speaks truth to power, and even though this word is down to up, it has power and it has authority, because before it was delivered from down to up, it first came from up to down. From the heart of God into the heart and the mouth of the speaker. So from down to up it comes, we carry it, and then we speak from down to up again, especially to those in places of power. Those who are called to prophetic ministry, and I think my wife mentioned a little bit about this last Sunday, usually those who are called to prophetic ministry, they end up on a lonely path. Today we have so many who want to be called by titles like prophet and apostle. And they are celebrated and they are surrounded by people and by security, and only people with flashy badges have access to them. Not the biblical prophets and apostles. These people suffered. They rubbed shoulders with the lowly and the lonely and the broken. These biblical prophets and apostles were persecuted. The greatest persecution that modern day prophets and apostles face is an insult on social media. Itu asuh mohonlah persecution tu. Not these people in the Bible. The biblical prophets did not speak from comfort. They often lived lonely lives. People were not lining up outside the house of the prophet to receive a prophetic word. In fact, sometimes they could not stand the prophetic word. It is a little different from our, I always keep saying, kala dunga, kala pani, kala gari, kala kapra, kala saguli. We have so much of that in Nagaland. That's different. But people did not like to listen to the biblical prophets because these prophets made people uncomfortable. In fact, in their presence, if you are rich and if you are powerful, you would be very, very uncomfortable. Because they spoke truth to power. And they interrupted the present state of affairs. And they challenged people to a different lifestyle. That is biblical prophecy. And because they spoke like that, they were often lonely. But they spoke. And that's why they are the voice in the wilderness. It's not the voice in the palace. It is not the voice in the mansion. It is not the voice in the parliament. It is the voice in the wilderness. And that is our theme for this month. Voice in the wilderness. Becoming a prophetic voice in dark times. So we are looking today at Amos. To understand Amos, you must understand the time in which he was prophesying. Israel. So he is prophesying in Israel. And Israel, during the time of Amos, is experiencing what is called the golden age. They're going through a golden age. The king was Jeroboam II. Their borders were expanding. Their economy was booming. Religious festivals were packed. Their religious programs were packed with people. People were coming. They were rejoicing, sacrificing, singing songs. It was wonderful. I'm going to talk about all that. In 3 Sundays today and the next 2, I'm going to talk about different things in the Bible of these prophets and also our situation in Nagaland. One day I'm going to talk about the religious setup of our state in Nagaland and also in the Bible. So they were doing very well. The rich people were comfortable. The religious people were doing very well. And on the surface, it looked like God was really blessing them. But like I said, the prophets saw beneath the surface. And God doesn't see the way we see things. God sees what is really happening. So remember prophetic ministry. It points to what is happening. It's not just pointing to what is about to happen or what is going to happen in the future. It points to what is really happening now. What God is saying about the now, right now, and how we are to live so that the future looks a certain way. So the voice of the Lord comes to a man called Amos. He was not a professional, holy man. He was not a preacher. He was not a politician. He was not somebody in power. He was a shepherd. He was a tender, a gardener of sycamore trees and maybe fig trees. He was a man with dirt in his fingers or underneath his fingernails. And suddenly the Spirit of God comes to him and gives him a voice and a word, and he begins to speak to people in positions of power. This shepherd and this gardener. And Amos starts this way. As you read chapter 1, if you have time, just read it. It's a small book. In chapter 1, from verse 2, he says, "The Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem." And then Amos, from chapter 1, going to chapter 2, he begins to prophesy. And he begins to name. So, these prophets have a lot to say to us. If you read the prophets, they even talk about things like moving the boundary stone. They talk about how the rich just want to keep on expanding their land and their fields, and they will take from the poor who has a little bit. Amos would say to the politician today, your seat is a stewardship, not a possession. It is a stewardship, and you will be answerable for the number of years that you sat in that seat of power. And what you did, you will stand before God and you will answer. To the voter, Amos would say, if you sell your vote for a bag of rice, or a false promise, or a bolero, or a motorcycle, you are selling your children's future into slavery. To the citizen, Amos would say, when we remain silent about systemic corruption, because that's just how things are, Amos would say we are helping to mix the cement and the balu. When we look at the life of Jesus, Jesus was this prophetic voice. He was the greatest prophet, the greatest prophetic voice. And one of the things that he did was, just before his arrest and his crucifixion, he went to the temple and he cleansed the temple. Because he would see corruption in the temple. And he overturned the tables. He threw them out. He threw away their money, their tables. He overturned these tables. And the tragedy is that today so many people in the church, in the 1940s, everything was, of course, going wrong. Hitler had come to power since the 30s or late 20s, was rising in power. A lot of people were supporting him. The church was supporting him. And slowly by slowly, he continued to strengthen his hold upon the people's throats. And slowly, their rights were taken away. And slowly, violence started against this and against that and against that. And by the time people realized what was happening, it was too late. Too late. During this time, there was this young brother and sister by the name Sophie and Hans Scholl. They were part of the Hitler Youth. Very passionate, very committed to the cause of Hitler, because he spoke about the nation. He spoke about the German people and the purity of their blood and how they must rise again among the nations of the world. And they loved that rhetoric. They loved those speeches. They loved the vision that he painted for them of a great Germany. And so they committed themselves to him. But as they were going along to their youth camps and listening to speeches and how the police were functioning, how the military was functioning, and how people were being murdered, their eyes slowly started to open, because even though they were like that, they lived in a home where their father was strongly opposed to Hitler. And he would say, my hope, let me say this, I have a quote here. I hope I can find it. I have so much, all these notes. The father, Robert, would tell them, what I want for you is to live in uprightness and freedom of spirit, no matter how difficult that proves to be. He would not try to force them anything. He would just tell them, what I really want for you is this, for you to live like this. And because the father's voice is always there, as they begin to see things, they begin to realize, wait a minute, this is not what we signed up for. We see injustice, we see corruption, we see oppression of minorities and certain people groups. How the Jewish people are now beginning to be targeted. We are beginning to see these things. And so they started talking with their friends, and they formed a small group. It was a resistance group, small group. A few of them, friends, they came together. These are young people. And they formed this group called the White Rose. So it's the White Rose Resistance. And they would print out pamphlets or leaflets and distribute. And so they printed a few, and there came a time when they printed their 6th leaflet. And they would talk about the corruption and how things are going wrong, trying to open the eyes of the German people. And so one day they got this little printing machine where they could print, and they printed hundreds of copies of their final leaflet. And a few of them, they packed all these leaflets into a suitcase, and they went to the University of Munich in Germany. I think this is 1942 or 43, I'm not sure about the year. And classes were going on, and they ran from door to door, different levels, different floors. They ran from door to door, wherever classes were being held, and outside the door they would lay stacks of these leaflets, where as the students come out, they could pick up and read. As they were doing that, as they reached up to the top floor, Sophie had this urge. It was, I don't know, it was prophetic. It was something in her heart to take the remaining dozens of leaflets in her hand, and she went out to the railing, and from the top she threw all those leaflets. And the pieces of paper, they came flying down like birds all over that grand lobby of the University of Munich. And the guards saw them. There were students who were very supportive of Hitler, saw them. They were reported. The guards came chasing after them. They were arrested for 4 days. They were interrogated. They were tortured. And they were taken through this mockery of a trial where the judge, instead of listening to defendants, would shout at them that reporters who are in the room cannot even hear what people are saying because the judge is shouting so much. Sophie calmly looked at the judge and she said, "One day you will stand where today we are standing." See, in times like this, my father, who was assassinated on September 23rd, 1992, he wrote this. He wrote a lot of things, so I'm going to read a few lines. When we observe the present sad state of affairs in Nagaland, it becomes all too apparent that the Nagas have become a discontented people. The poor are discontented because they do not have. The rich are discontented because they want more. And it goes on to say this and that. And for him, the conclusion was, we need to awaken the conscience of the people of Nagaland. And he started what is called the Conscience Forum of Nagaland. And in his career in politics and in public life, I don't know if Holon is here, Holon's father worked with him. And towards his last years, Kezia, I don't know if she's here, Kezia's grandfather worked very closely with my father. And I'm happy that they're in this church. And so this Conscience Forum of Nagaland, and he believed that the conscience must be awakened. That people themselves must come to this realization. Martin Luther King, the leader of the civil rights movement in the United States, he used to say this. He said, the church is not a puppet of the state. The church is not a puppet of the government, to be controlled by the government. He said the church is also not a master of the state. The church must be the conscience of the state. Which brings us to us. Who do we want to be now? A prophecy is not just about hey, next Saturday this year that's nice. And there is an element to that. It's called a word of encouragement, and we all need that. We need words of encouragement. But biblical prophetic ministry is we are called to be a voice, especially speaking truth to power. To be a voice that tells people, this is actually what is going on. This is what God is saying. It should be a symbol of what it means to be a prophetic voice. It may not be grand. It may not make the headlines. Maybe nobody will notice, but God will notice. But there will be something towards justice. We have to be that voice. See, please don't misunderstand me. Amos is not upset that rich people have big houses. He's not upset about that. Amos would ask if DMC or if a big business or whatever it is, people of power and influence, if they are making decisions in your colony, in your district, things they are doing that would benefit the rich but hurt the poor, Amos would say, take a side. Nah, the battle is not fair. Nah. Who will win? Well, the rich, the powerful. The poor have no chance. That is unfair. If God were to be silent, and if the church is to be silent, that would be unfair. And so to make the odds even, God stands with the marginalized and the broken and the weak. And He calls His people, His church, to be like that. Then things become fair and impartial.